All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Seamus Demery. I'm a sales tech here at Nagios Enterprises. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on Nagios Log Server. There will be several different organizations joining in today, so I'll be giving you guys a higher level overview of Log Server and its capabilities. But after the session, you should have a really good idea of how to get around the interface, how to accomplish common tasks, and how to get a lot of value out of Log Server. We will be primarily focusing on Nagios Log Server, which is our enterprise class log collection, analysis, archiving, and alerting platform. One thing I'll note is that audio feeds from you guys will be muted during the session, but if you have any questions at all, go ahead and punch those into the questions section of the GoToWebinar interface. And then after the session, the main body of the session where we'll go through the interface, I'll be sure to cover each one of those. So I'd definitely love to hear from you. More than happy to help with any questions you have, but if you could just punch those into the chat section, and then at the end of the session, we'll be sure to cover those for you. If you have additional questions beyond what we can cover here today, you can always contact us by email at sales@nagios.com, and we'll do everything we can to answer those for you. And also, if you'd like a demo tailored specifically for your group, either on Log Server or other solutions like Nagios XI or Network Analyzer or Fusion, again, you can email us at sales@nagios.com, and we can put together a custom demo for you. And finally, we will be recording today's session, so it can be made available to others online in the future. So with that being said, let's jump over to our agenda slide and talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about here today. So to start with, we'll talk about what Nagios Log Server is, where it came from, what it's built on, and also a little bit of information about the architectural perspective from Log Server. And then we'll jump into the interface and talk about setting up common sources, things like Linux systems, Windows systems, and network devices. After that, we'll talk about making use of that data through custom queries, generating query-based alerts, creating custom dashboard visualizations. And then to finish up, we'll look at Log Server from a more administrative perspective and discuss things like inputs and outputs and filters, and backup and maintenance settings, and managing the clustering that Log Server is capable of. So jumping over to our next slide, we'll talk a little bit about where Log Server came from and what it's built on. So Log Server is the result of a 90-minute conversation at the 2013 Nagios World Conference. It was an Ask Nagios session, so there were community members, Nagios Solutions users, and Nagios developers all having a discussion. And about 30 minutes of that 90-minute discussion had to do with people needing a good, effective log management solution. And so 1 year later at the 2014 World Conference, we released Nagios Log Server. And it's fast become our second most popular solution. It's at this point widely used all over the world. And it's built on the ELK stack, which is a very popular open source log management stack that some of you may actually be familiar with. ELK is awesome. It's a very capable log management stack. However, Nagios Log Server will make it significantly easier to leverage the power of the ELK stack. Much like Nagios XI makes it much easier to leverage the power of Nagios Core, Nagios Log Server significantly increases the ease of use of getting up and running with ELK and actually leveraging all the cool things it can do. So it's all consolidated, it's one quick installer, and you're able to make use of these components. It's also got some nice proprietary stuff, for example, the ability to easily send query-based alert data upstream to a Nagios XI or Nagios Core server. Now the components of the ELK stack are Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Now, Elasticsearch provides the database where all of the log indexes are stored, and we will talk more about indexes in just a minute. So that stores the data, and it's also responsible for the clustering side of things. So a great thing about Nagios Log Server is that it's got automatic clustered redundancy as long as you're running 2 or more instances. Logstash acts as the initial collector for the log data. It also parses that data and then moves it over to Elasticsearch, so it'll parse it into queryable fields and then shuffle it over to Elasticsearch for storage. And Logstash also has the capability to output, so push data upstream to other tools. And then Kibana provides parts of the front-end visualization. So Kibana would be responsible for things like the customizable dashboards in Log Server. So each one individually is a very powerful project, but you put them all together and then package them all as one quick and easy to install, fully supported solution, and it gives you a really nice log management solution. Now, as far as how Log Server works, we'll talk about things from a more architectural perspective at this point. So let me pull up my pen tool here, and then we'll minimize that. Now, one point to keep in mind is that unlike how Nagios can do an active check or a passive check, Nagios Core or Nagios XI, where your Nagios server could either reach out to the thing it's checking and pull back data or receive data passively from what it's checking, Log Server is strictly going to be a send from the source upstream to the Log Server cluster. Now, by default, you'll be sending data from your log sources to a single instance, a specific instance. But if you are running multiple instances, an even better way to handle that would be to put your own load balancer or round-robin DNS setup in front of log server cluster. And that way the sources would send their data up to that, and then that would route those logs depending on which instance was available at that time. If you are sending to a specific instance and that instance goes into a problem state and can't receive data, that data will queue on the source for a short time in memory. So short term, it's a great option. It'll just queue it up, cache it in memory, and then it'll push it upstream to log server when the instance recovered. But if that goes on long enough, it can actually have a negative impact on the performance of the source. And in that case, you'd actually be breaking the thing you're monitoring through your efforts to monitor it and keep it healthy. So to avoid that, putting a round-robin DNS or load balancer in front of log server and having a cluster in place would be the absolute best case scenario. So again, the sources feed their data northbound up to log server specifically. Log server never reaches out to the sources to see what's going on. And then as far as the clustering side of things, it's actually really cool. And that's all handled by Elasticsearch. So a couple of key Elasticsearch terms. First off, there's an index. And an index is all of the data that's been collected for a single day. So that's all of the log events that log server has collected for that day. Now each index is going to be broken into 5 pieces, and each of those pieces is known as a shard. Now the way the clustering is handled is that each shard is going to be allocated as a primary on one system, so we'll say this is where the primary is housed, and also as a replica shard over on another instance. Now in the event that one of these instances goes into a problem state, say the instance that's housing the replica shard goes into a problem state, Nagios Log Server is going to automatically create a new replica shard on another instance. And so as long as you have 2 or more instances still available, Log Server is going to continue to try to make sure that you've got that clustered redundancy and that your data is in a couple of places. And of course, the more instances that you have in your cluster, the better your redundancy is. And also the greater ability that the cluster has to intake larger quantities of data, store the data for a longer amount of time, and so on and so forth. So we've got a single instance option, but there you wouldn't have the redundancy, and also multiple instances have high value in providing you with load balance faster searches. So the more instances you have, the faster it will be to actually run complex queries and pull back useful data from the system. And then once those logs are collected, you're provided with the ability to query for specific subsets, dashboard that data, and also send many different alert types, which we'll dig into more, and we'll actually put together a test alert. But Log Server can send an email, it can push an SNMP trap upstream to another tool, and it can also execute a script, very similar to what Nagios can do. Additionally, it's got the ability to send data right to a Nagios server. So you could send query-based alert data upstream to a Nagios XI or core server and have centralized visibility at that Nagios server of not only the Nagios checks, but also everything that Log Server is doing. So a lot of different things you can do with that data once it's collected. So let me go ahead and clear the board here, and then we'll go ahead and just jump right into the interface and take a look around. So when you first log into Log Server, you're presented with your home dashboard, and here you've got quick setup guides for common sources, quick access to your global and personal queries and dashboards, ways to contact us, total events over time, and things like that. Now, as far as setting up the sources, you could either start with these setup guides here, or just click plus log source up in the upper right here. And this will actually give you access to all of the log sources. So there's a Linux guide, a Windows guide, a network device guide, ways to send data from specific Linux files and Windows files, application-specific logging options like Apache, IIS, MySQL, PHP, and MS SQL. And then you can also do a one-time import from a specific file. So looking at the setup guides, if we go to the Linux guide, you'll see that by default, you'll be using the native rsyslog daemon. So there's nothing specifically to install on the system. It's really just a matter of configuring rsyslog to feed the data upstream to Nagios Log Server. So you can either do the scripted option, which is very quick and easy. You just curl for the setup script and then run the second command, which is going to define things like where that log data should go, the specific port that it would be sent to, and Log Server expects to receive syslog data on 5544. You can also do a manual option, and here you'd basically just be manually updating your rsyslog.com file with the necessary information to feed that data upstream to Log Server. There's also syslog ng support, so you'll see that in this tab here. For a Windows machine, you'll be using a free client called NXLog. And so you'll install NXLog on that machine and then replace the contents of the nxlog.conf file with everything you see here. Now, one thing I'll mention, because I've run into it before, I've actually personally done it, is I would highly recommend just using select all and then copy, and then dropping this into that file. Because as you can see here, if you drag and copy, I have actually in the past highlighted the header of the next section, drop that into the file, and then you have trailing data that NXLog doesn't know what it is, and so it actually doesn't work. So you've got select all and copy here, and mainly just make sure that everything that's here and nothing but what's here is dropped into that nxlog.conf file. And this accomplishes a similar thing to the syslog setup, in that this is going to tell that log data where to go. So in this output here, and then define the specific port that event log is expected on in log server, which is 3515. And then once you've done that, just run net start nxlog from the command prompt, and that'll start the nxlog service with those new configurations, and it'll start shipping that event log data upstream to log server. For network devices, it is going to kind of depend on the specific device. There's generic setup guide here. It'll tell you the IP or the host name if you've got some kind of a load balance set up. And it's also going to give you the port. And so with a network device, it's going to be a syslog, and so it's going to be sending that to 5544, just like syslog data from a Linux system. You'll also notice a Juniper specific guide here, just to give you another frame of reference. So this tells you how to set up a Juniper. And as another example, I can actually show you an HP ProCurve, and we'll put in our secure password here, and jump over to this. And so in the ProCurve interface, you'll actually find all of the log settings in the diagnostic section. So there's a log configuration section where you can enable logging, tell it where that log data should go, determine the syslog level. And so it is going to vary device to device is the main point, but essentially the primary focus here is on configuring the device such that it will send the log data where it should go. It'll send the kind of logs you want it to, and that it'll send them to 5544. So fairly simple to set that up too. And then for things like a specific Linux file, it's first you do the Linux source setup, so that's a starting point. And then you're basically just going to be adding an additional argument to the command to specify the path to that specific file that you'd like to send the data from. So that's fairly simple. With a Windows file, same basic concept, only here what you'd be adding is an additional input with the path to that file, and you'll give that input a specific name. And then at the end of the nxlog.conf, you're also going to add that particular name, so the one you defined for the input, to the path list in the nxlog.conf. So that's fairly simple to accomplish as well. And then some of them are even easier. For example, if you want to monitor MS SQL logs, just follow the Windows source setup, and that's it. You're done. Those logs are automatically going to be sent over. Other information here for other applications, and then you can also do a one-time import from a specific file if you want to dump a bunch of logs in at once, and so that's a capability as well. Another important point here before we move along is that ultimately log server can intake and parse and enable you to make use of essentially any kind of machine-generated log data. So the source setup guides here are a starting point. This is going to cover a lot of bases. Even just syslog and event log covers a ton of bases. But you may have a less common application, you may have a proprietary application, an older operating system, something that generates non-standard formatted log data. And the beautiful thing about log server, much like how Nagios can check pretty much anything, you just have to find, the metric has to be quantifiable, and you have to be able to write a plugin for it following the guidelines. Log server is the same thing. Logstash actually enables you to create custom grok filters, they're called. And once you've written one, that will actually tell log server how to parse that data into queryable fields. So at the end of the day, it's the perfect platform for pretty much any kind of machine-generated log data, and even beyond that, pretty much any kind of text data. I mean, ultimately, you could parse a cookbook if you wanted to. It's just a matter of writing the right filter for it. So it's a very flexible platform in that respect. But the standard setup guides provide you with a very nice, quick and easy way to get common types of log data into log server and start making use of them right away. So once you've got that log data coming in, then the next step would be to start making use of it. And so the best way to do that is to probably start with one of the built-in dashboards. So queries are going to be defining for you the specific subsets of the data that you'd like to dig into, and then dashboards will determine how you'd like to visualize that data. And when you first log in, you will see some built-in dashboards. So things like top sources and types, log server search, a guided dashboard, an empty dashboard. And so we'll start with top sources and types. So we just go to our home menu, click through on that, and here we'll see the top hosts sending in data. So the top hosts that have sent data to Log Server. The top types of data, here we've got syslog and event log and a little bit of Apache access, total events over time. And then underneath that, you've got information on each of the individual log entries coming in. And so we could actually expand one of these down here in the All Events Fields table, and you can actually see each of the individual fields that have been parsed. And so each of these is a discrete element of this log that has been parsed when the log was taken in by Logstash, and each of these is a unique piece that you can actually query based on. So you can also do a quick search on Google or Bing or Stack Overflow for these items, and it will sanitize the data, so it's not going to send things like internal IPs and such out into the wild. But just to get some context, if you're unsure what something is, say a certain event ID or something like that, you can just do a quick Google, Bing, or Stack Overflow search. So this is a nice starting point just to help you see what kind of data is coming in. Then in addition to just viewing more general data, you can easily look for very specific things too. So before we jump into that, I'll kind of outline the menu options here on the upper right. And so the first one you see, and I'll actually open the queries and filters here, the first one you see is a time dropdown. Now what this does is it essentially just updates the filter that's determining the timestamp. And so by default we're looking at a day ago to a minute ago, but we could look at really any time period you'd like. Say you want to look at 7 days worth of data, just update that. You'll notice that updates your filter here, and now we're looking at 7 days worth of data. To the right of that is just a quick refresh link to refresh the dashboard and take into account any changes you might have made. You can also go to your Save Default dashboard just by clicking the home icon here. You can load a different query on this dashboard by clicking the Queries Spyglass here. You can create an alert based on the query that's in place. You can load a dashboard very easily here. And then you can save the current dashboard, either as a personal dashboard, a global dashboard, or if you'd like to, you can export it as a JSON file to share it with other people. And I will show you a few dashboards on the Nagios Exchange as well. And then I'll also mention that you can share a direct link to the dashboard by clicking the icon right here. And then finally, there's the Configure dashboard, and I'll point this out just because a common question I get is how do I add additional time periods here? Instead of always having to go to custom to look at, say, a 12-hour view, or another view, I guess there's a 12-hour there, but some specific time frame that's not in the defaults that you'd like to reference regularly. That's very simple, actually. Just go to Configure Dashboard, go over to Time Picker, and just add an additional relative time option here. And once you've done that and saved it, it's actually going to populate that right in the dropdown for you. So very quick and easy to do that, and I mention it just because it's a common question that I see. So in addition to just kind of seeing what's coming in, you can also do a quick search. And the easiest way to do that, in my opinion, would be to just load the Log Server Search dashboard. And so with the Log Server Search dashboard, you're basically able to just very quickly look for specific things. And so here, for example, we could look for that HP Pro Curve. And so we'll do a quick search for that. And scrolling down, we see how many events match our very simple query, just looking for that particular IP. And scrolling down, what we notice is that some of these are actually Nagios alerts. So we are feeding Nagios alert data into this Log Server demo as well. But underneath that, I see some that are actually associated with this particular host. And so what we're going to do to narrow it down is just pop that one open, scroll down, and we see that the host field is where that's actually specifically defined. And so we'll scroll back up and we'll just append our query a little bit. So very simple, we'll just make that host 192.168.541 and update. And now scrolling down, that's helped us narrow it down to look for just that very specific information that we might be interested in. So now we're looking at just data from this host. Now the queries by default, you can click the little colored circle here to check this out. By default they would be leucine, but it also supports regex and top-end. So if you'd like to kind of customize that and use different query syntax, you certainly can. Otherwise, leucine's very nice, very quick and easy to learn, and you can actually click the About Leucine query here to learn more about the various operators that would be involved in leucine. But essentially, it's just and or and not operators in capitals, and or not, and you can group things with parentheses. And I'll note that you can also, if you hit plus here, you can basically create an additional field here that's an or statement. So it would be this, or this, and if we made a third one, or this. And so the advantage there, and I'll actually close this one and put some data in here, the advantage here is that it's actually going to help color code things like the events over time graph. And so let's narrow this one down a little bit. Let's scroll down here real quick, and I will actually close this one temporarily, and we'll scroll down and find a field that we can actually include. So let's say we wanted to look at warning. So we see that's log severity and then capitalized warning. What we'll do is we'll pop up here, we'll add an additional one, we'll switch this to log severity, and then we'll add warning. And so what that's going to do is look for anything related to the specific host or things with log severity warning. And so if we scroll down, now we can see on the chart, there's not a ton of data for this particular one, but you can see that all the events here are in blue, all of the related events to that particular host, and then just that subset that's related to warning is going to be color-coded here. So you can actually make some really cool looking graphs with color coding to help you better really understand quickly visually what relates to what in the context of your query. Now you can also narrow things down other ways. So we're looking for this particular host. We could use filters to narrow down what we're after as well. And for this one, I'm going to approach it a couple different ways. There's one logical way to do it and one that's not quite as efficient, but I want to make sure that you know there are a few different ways to approach this. So we'll scroll down here, and taking a quick look at this, I see we've got warning, we've got info, we've got critical. Now odds are, in an actual production use case, you're probably not too concerned about info. So an easy way to approach this would be to open up one of those info entries, scroll down, and just hit the cross out here. That's going to add a filter that says it must not match that particular value. So you click the spyglass, and now if you go back up to the top, you see that we've got must not log severity info. So that's a quick and easy way to do it, especially if there's just one or two things that you want to negate. Now another way to approach it, just as kind of just as an exercise to show you the various options, we'll toggle this off for a moment, and we'll scroll back down. So now we're back to our warning and info and critical. Another way to approach that would say you want to see warning or critical, anything that shows warning or critical essentially. So in a filter context, what you could do is open up warning. Now here you see you've got two options essentially. You can add a filter to match the value or a filter that must not match the value. But there is a third option that you don't get until you actually add the filter. So first we're going to add the warning filter. And of course, as we expect, that narrows it down to just warning. But we'll toggle this off for a second. We'll go back down and we'll find a critical, open that up, and then add a filter for that. And so we'll add a must filter for that. And that narrows it down to just those two. Now we'll scroll back up, and what I wanted to show you is that if you go to edit any of the filters, there is a third option, which is either. So we'll save that, and we will toggle this one back on. We'll do the exact same over here. We'll make this either, and we'll save that. And so now what we're doing is essentially we're looking for either log severity warning or log severity critical. And so that'll basically help us get the results that we're looking for in a totally different way, essentially. So there's a lot of different ways to approach that. And then, of course, we could toggle this one on and off. This one doesn't really have a whole lot of impact anymore. But here we go. We've got our warning and critical. And essentially, if we toggle this one off, it should have no impact. We're still down to our warning and critical once the page refreshes. So between queries and filters, you can essentially narrow it down to anything that you'd like to see, very specific subsets of the data, or look for very broad sets of the data. And then once you've got a nice query in place that's showing something that's useful to you, we'll just go to save. We'll call this .41 warn and crit webinar. And we'll spell it right, there we go. And then as I said, you can save this as an individual query, as a global query, meaning all the other users in the system can see it, or you can export it as a JSON file to pass it along and share it with other people. You can also set this as your default dashboard if you'd like to, but for this point here, we'll just go ahead and save this as a global dashboard. And so there we go, .41 warn and crit webinar, that is now saved, and so we can reference that at any time. Now, beyond just narrowing it down to look for specific things, you can also interact with the various panels that are in place here. And so what we'll do for that is we'll go back up to our dashboards, and now that we've got that saved, we're going to go ahead and load the empty dashboard. This is another one that if you're running the free 60-day trial, you will actually see in your system when you first log in. Now this one you can see is wide open. There's really nothing here. There's not even a time filter in place. We're looking for everything over no particular time, so you're not going to see a lot of info here. So the first thing I might do is go to say a 2-day view and just add a time filter. Now what we'd want to do is add additional rows and panels to customize what we're actually seeing. So first we'll click add row, and we'll call one our fields. So this is going to be all of those various incoming log events, so we'll just call that our fields table and create that. And then we'll add another one called panels, and we'll put a couple of demonstration panels up on that one for you. So we'll create that, and we actually want fields to be underneath, so we can go ahead and just use the arrows to order them however we'd like. Go ahead and save that, and now you see we've got 2 empty rows that we can add panels to. Now there's a lot of ways to add panels. To me, the easiest way to do it would be to go to add panel to empty row on this bottom row here. And then we'll just do 2 simple things. We'll add a table, we'll span it to 12, and we'll click Save. And I'll show you that again just because it's important. Once you do this, it enables you to basically make panels on any of the data that's present. So again, add a panel to that empty row, go down to Table, and simply span it to 12 because we know it's going to take up a lot of space. Save that, and now here we go. We've got a bunch of log events, and you'll notice on the left a ton of different fields that can be used to create filters and to create panels. And so what we're going to do is, as you may notice, we don't actually have any columns here. We're actually just seeing the raw log messages. So if you want to organize these a little bit, you can just click the items over here, the checkbox next to each of these, to add columns in your actual message section over here. And so what we'll do is first the timestamp. Probably a very common use case to want to organize things chronologically based on timestamp, and then possibly the host that's involved. So we'll click that one, and then maybe the type of log. Is it syslog? Is it event log? So we'll go down and add that. And then finally, the message itself may be of use, so we'll actually add the message too, but any of the fields shown here can be added there. So we'll add the message, and now you've got some columns. They will populate automatically in the order that you select them over here, but you can also use these small arrows here to arrange them however you want and move them from left to right and so on and so forth. But typically timestamp there is going to be a good way to approach it. And now you've got everything organized. And so now that we've got this here, it makes it very easy to add other panels. So I will note if you do want to go up to the empty row and just click Add Panel, you'll see a ton of options here. So you could create it from scratch here, or you could simply scroll down and find the field that you'd like to target for the panel and just click on it. And I'll show you how that works. So say we wanted a visualization, a panel of event IDs from Windows systems. You can just click that, and here we go. You've got your microanalysis of event ID, and we'll just go ahead and go to Terms and add, say, a bar graph of this. Now if you scroll back up to the top of your list here, you see that you've got a new panel, and all you have to do is just drag that up, pop it onto that row, and then it will populate to a span of 12, and we can go ahead and close this one. And all you need to do is go to Configure, so the gear icon on the upper right, span that down to 4, save it, and there you go. You've got a nice little panel here. Now you'll also notice that we have missing field and other values. Maybe you don't care about that. You can go to Configure again and go over to the panel options and negate missing and other. So that's very simple to accomplish as well. And now you've got a nice top 10 terms in field event ID with a listing for each of them here. Let's see other items that could be added, perhaps that severity level that we looked at from that pro curve. So we'll scroll back down and just check these out, see which one of these might have some good info. Here we go. So we've got a severity label option here with informational, notice, error, debug, and so we'll click on that one, and maybe this would make a nice pie chart. So we'll click pie. We'll go back up to the top, and one quick tip too is if you try to drag this up to the right of a panel in a row that already has one in it, it will bounce down because there's not room for both of them. So the trick is drag it up to the left of the existing panel, and then that'll populate it above it, as you can see here. And then once we span this down to 12, again going to the configure box, so we'll span this down from 12, down to 4, and then we'll also go to panel options and negate missing and other in this case as well, and save it, and now we've got it right here. So we can close this out. And I'll also note that once you've created panels, if you want to kind of clean things up to add additional ones and maybe additional rows, you can just hover to the upper left of any row and actually minimize all those panels to open it back up and add additional rows. So that's a simple example, and then once you've created all of this and you've created your dashboard, you can just go up to save and save that information there. Now, and we'll actually go ahead and do that. We'll call this our awesome webinar dashboard. So we'll go ahead and save that, and we'll save that as a global for everybody, and there we go. And now I would like to show you too some of the cool possibilities of dashboard. So this is a simple example, but it does kind of show you how quickly you can create dashboard visualizations. I also wanted to jump over to the Nagios Exchange because here you've got some actually really cool community contributed dashboards. So what we'll do is, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, just real quickly, exchange.nagios.org, the Nagios Exchange, is a long-running Nagios community site where thousands and thousands of users all over the world of Nagios solutions and users of Nagios open source projects like Nagios Core contribute things to share with the community. For example, Nagios plugins, there's over 4,200 of those. So it's a really cool resource, and over time some log server resources have started to appear here. So we'll just do a quick search for log server. We'll go to our Nagios log server listings here. We'll go to dashboards, and we have 17 listings. And there's some cool stuff here. So 80 lockouts, that's really useful. An asterisk log analyzer. The Better Apache dashboard, I'll show you. This is actually from one of the original Nagios Core lead developers, Scott Wilkerson. And this one's cool because it actually shows you information in a geographic context. So you can actually see where Apache hits are coming from geographically. And that's really cool information. So you can do more than just pie charts and graphs and lists. You can do some more geographic perspective stuff too. So there's a lot of possibilities with those dashboards. Other interesting ones, the Cisco ASA VPN monitoring dashboard is a similar concept. And so here I'll show you that example as well. Similar concept, you've got pie charts, you've got graphs, and you've got some geographic context. And then I'll also highlight some other ones. So IIS, McAfee Web Gateway, NetFilter, security dashboards. But down at the very bottom, there's a couple of really cool options. So Windows Security Sysadmin dashboards and Windows Sysadmin dashboards, both of these actually have multiple queries and dashboards built in. So we'll click through here, and I'll show you. So there's actually multiple items here. There's the log on, log off data. There's Windows Firewall. There's RDP logons. There's Wi-Fi logons. And the nice thing about it is all you need to do is download this file. So this will be a JSON file. And then jump back over to your dashboard and go here and go to Advanced. Go to the Load and go to Advanced, and then browse for that file. And then that'll drop it right in. And if you have data that actually matches what that dashboard is built around, then it's going to start showing you the cool visualizations and the maps and things. So definitely check out those community ones. There's some great projects here, and these are all things that you can very easily leverage and just drop right into your system. So you can visualize things the way you want to. You can narrow down what you're looking for to very specific subsets of the data. The next thing you might want to do is actually alert based on some of the queries that you put together. And that's very easy to do in Log Server. So for that, we'll go up to the alerting tab. And again, if you have a query in place that you'd like to alert on, you can just click Manage Queries, and it'll just create an alert, click Create an Alert, and it will create an alert based on the query that's actually present on the dashboard at that time. But we'll go up to the alerting tab, and we'll create a new alert, and we'll call this one our .41 warning crit. And then we'll use that .41 warning and critical query that's set up. And so you can pick any of the queries that you've put in place and create an alert based on that. We'll define a check interval, which in this case we'll check every 5 minutes, but you can define that however you'd like. And then we'll do the look back period. Now, this is a little different for those of you that are familiar with Nagios. It's basically just a check interval. How often would you like to check this particular item? And that particular setting is the exact same in Log Server. But you do also have a look back period. And what that is how far back in the log data from the point that each alert is run, from the point that each check is run, would you like to look to see if there are matching results? And so you could check every 5 minutes, but you could look back over 20 minutes worth of the collected log data. So that's something that you can customize on a per check basis. And then the thresholds typically would just be the number which must be exceeded in order for an alert to be sent. And so the first field is the number which must be exceeded in order for a warning alert to go out. So with a setting of 5, at 6 or more, we're going to get a warning alert. And then the second is the critical. So with a setting of 10, at 11 or more, we're going to get a critical alert. I will also mention, because it's a common question I get as well, is that if you want to alert on the absence of something, you're looking for instance, if you're expecting a successful login and one doesn't happen, you'd like to get an alert, that's very simple to do as well. And so you just make each field 1:, so your warning and your critical thresholds, and that's all you got to do. And if you forget that, just hover over the tooltip and that'll explain it for you. So you can alert either on the presence of a certain number of matching results or on the absence of matching results. So that's a really nice feature as well. But we'll just put this back to 5 and 10. And then for the alert methods, as we talked about briefly, there's many options. So first off, you can send data straight to Nagios Core or XI using NRDP, the Nagios Remote Data Processor. So Log Server looks for matching results. When an alert state is detected, it feeds things upstream to Nagios, and then Nagios could give you centralized visibility and alerting. You can also execute a script, much like Nagios Core XI can execute an event handler, so some kind of automated scripted action that takes place in response to a problem being found. You can send an SNMP trap northbound to another tool, like a ticketing or a SIM system. Or you can email people directly. So the great thing about Log Server is that it has great value as just a standalone log management platform. It can send emails by itself. It doesn't need to integrate with another tool. But if you'd like to, you can certainly integrate it with other Nagios solutions like Nagios XI or Core and have everything in one place. So you've got all your log data being checked, you've got all of your regular hardware and application metrics being checked. So a great standalone, but also a lot of value alongside other tools. So once we get this in place, we'll say we want to email users, then we just pick the users that we'd like to email from the system. So we'll say we want to send some emails to Scott and test user. And so once you pick those, you pick an email template, and there are a few different, you can actually create your own email templates using the many built-in macros or use the system default. And the templates are cool. They can, the built-in macros can even do things like including the last single or the last 10 related log entries in the body of that email message. So check those out too. And then we will create their alert. That's going to pop up here, and eventually it's going to run a check and start checking this particular item. Regarding those email templates, that's right here in email templates. And so if we go to view macros, you can see all the various macros that are built into the system, again, including the unique hosts that were related, as well as the last single log entry or the last 10 log entries related to that alert. So there's some really cool information that you can pass in those emails. If you want to integrate with Nagios, you just set up your Nagios server right here. Your SNMP trap receivers can be set up right here. So again, lots of alert mechanisms, lots of ways to check it. And regarding Nagios XI as well, I will actually just real quickly jump over there and show you how you can set these up directly from XI as well. And so if you set it up in Log Server is going to send that data upstream to XI. So XI will receive it as a passive check. You can also set it up in XI using the quick and easy Log Server wizard. So we'll just do a quick filter in our configuration wizards for Log Server. And it's very easy to use. First off, you enter the host address. And in this case, this is the host that the host in Nagios that we're going to associate this alert with. So it'll show up right alongside all the other services on this host. And we'll attach this one to .41, that HP Pro curve we've been looking at. And then the URL would be the URL of Log Server. And so we'll add that. So that's our IP/Nagios Log Server. We'll drop that in, and then finally the API key. And so we'll hop back. And the API key in a Log Server, another common question I get, just click your username on the upper right, and there it is. So really easy to fetch that. We'll drop that in and hit next, and now we've got access to all of the queries that are in place over on the other side. So all the queries that are set up in Log Server, you can create alerts on right inside of XI. Now keeping in mind that these will be active checks. So in this case, instead of receiving the data as XI would if you set it up on Log Server, setting it up in XI means that Nagios is going to reach out to Log Server, check the results of the query, and pull back the info. You can also, and this is pretty cool, create your own Lucene or JSON queries and generate alerts based on those. So you don't even have to leverage queries you've already set up over on the Log Server side. You can just write them on the fly here. So once you've done that, it just becomes like any other Nagios check. And I think I have in the past set up some checks similar to that .41. Let's do a quick search for .41 and see what we've got alongside it there. So scrolling down, yeah, there we go. And so we've got a couple of Log Server checks right alongside everything that Nagios XI is checking. So we've got port bandwidth and status data and warning and crit severity log checks. So that's really nice, lots of different ways to alert. So that's a quick walkthrough of the dashboards, the queries, setting up source data. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about the administration side of things. And a quick reminder, if you guys have any questions, go ahead and type those in. Once we cover the admin stuff and talk a little bit about the licensing side of things, then we'll jump over to questions. So happy to help with anything you've got. Just go ahead and punch that into the chat section and I'll help you out. So in the admin section, we'll highlight a couple of spots here. First off, we'll look at global configuration, and this is actually the Logstash side of things. And so this is where you would configure what are called inputs, outputs, and filters. Now inputs are quite simply helping Log Server understand where it should expect specific types of data to enter the system. And so Here, for example, the syslog input is just saying if it's a syslog data, log server can expect that on 5544. And then based on this, certain filters will be run on that data. Now, filters are what actually parses the data into queryable fields, and this is where you can write a custom grok filter of your own to parse pretty much anything. Now, there is an event log and a syslog filter built in just by default under the hood. You won't actually even see them here in the list, but we do include an Apache filter. And that Apache filter gives you an idea of how a grok filter is structured. So this is basically what turns that big gnarly chunk of Apache access or Apache error data into something you can query for specific subsets of that data on. And so that's a nice example. I'll also mention that if you want a debugger, there is a grok debugger out there. And here's the URL, grokdebug.herokuapp.com. And so this is a really cool tool because you can actually put your input here. So you put your raw log data input in and then start to define your grok filter, and you're actually going to get an error down here, or it's going to start parsing that data. So this is a nice way to test out filters and make sure they work before you bring them back into Nagios Log Server. Now, you can also do outputs, and with an output, you'd actually be feeding that data elsewhere after Log Server receives it. So a log server receives the data, Logstash brings it in through a certain port, runs a grok filter on it, and can then feed that data elsewhere, and so that's a capability as well. Also looking through the admin menu here, you've got an audit report of things like logins and logouts and users running queries and subsystem jobs that are being run. You've got cluster status, and so with this you can actually see the status of the cluster. If you see a green, that means you've got 2 or more instances running. If you see yellow, that means you're down to a single instance. And so if you're running a single instance install, this will always be yellow because you don't have any redundancy. But as soon as you have 2 or more and at least 2 are functioning, then you'll see a green status here. But you can see how many instances you have. You can see the primary and total size of the data stored, how many documents. You can see all your indexes, again, which is a collection of all the log data that's been collected over a day. And you can close these, meaning it will be still present on the cluster, but not queryable. The advantage, though, is that if you close an index, it's not going to be using other resources because all of the open indexes actually use memory. They use memory and they use CPU, and so closing them is a way to keep them on the cluster, but also free up other resources for the time being until you actually need to cluster that data. Down in instance status, you can see how many instances you've got, and then on a per instance basis, you can see things like CPU utilization, memory utilization, free memory, how much storage is used and available, whether Elasticsearch and Logstash are running. That's really useful info too. And you'll notice that CPU is hardly working, but memory is at fairly high utilization, and that is just the nature of the elk stack. What Log Server is going to do is really use about as much memory as it can right out of the gate, and you can have up to a maximum of 64 gig of memory per instance. And after that, it wouldn't support more memory than that per instance. But it will basically use as much as it can and keep everything cached in memory so that when you run a query, it's boom, very fast results. And so memory will typically be pretty high, even if you have a lot of it in several instances. Down in index status, you can actually see all those indexes, and again, you can close those or delete those if you'd like to. And then backup and maintenance contains similar considerations. So you can optimize indexes older than X amount of days. You can close indexes automatically older than a certain amount of days. And then you can delete indexes. Now, close indexes older than just means that they're going to be closed. They'll still, as I said, be on the cluster, but they won't be using any resources other than drive space. However, in order to query them, you will need to open those back up. And delete indexes, though, really means delete. So once you set this to a certain number of days, they're going to be gone forever unless you shuffle them over to a separate repository. So this just needs to be a mountable path from each of the log server instances. So a lot of the time people will use fast disks like SSDs on their log server instances and then have a slower storage repository somewhere. So after a certain number of days, those indexes would get shuffled over to the repository, won't be using any resources on the log server cluster, but will be available. Say you get an audit in 2 years and you need to prove that something did or didn't happen, you'll have those indexes in the repository so you can pull them back in and query them. And so we've got really aggressive settings here. Close after 30 days, delete after 31, delete backups older than. And so in our case, we're going to close them after 30 days, delete them after 31, and at 61 days in, those indexes are just going to be gone. But you can customize these however you want, and that way it fits whatever your internal policies are. You've also got a system status section, and here you can pick your instance. You can start and stop the Elasticsearch and Logstash services right from the GUI. And you can also download a system profile. So if you do ever need troubleshooting on anything, this will contain a wealth of useful information to help the support techs troubleshoot and get everything back up and running for you. And then you've also got things like mail settings. So for the email, you can do PHP mail or set up SMTP settings. And these would be things like alerts that are sent from the system. And then under user management, this is where you would set up each of the individual users in the system. And so you can create a user either for local authentication, that's the default, or add users from LDAP or AD. And so you'd set up the authentication servers here. And then when you go to user management, you could add them from LDAP AD instead of adding them individually with create user. Now, if we go to create user, you'll see that there's two user access levels. There's admin, which means they have full access to everything. They can see the admin menu. They can modify global and individual dashboards and queries, and basically they've got full access to everything. Then you've got the user level, which then a regular user wouldn't have access to things like configure, the administration section, and they'd only be able to edit their own personal dashboards and queries and things like that, their own password. They wouldn't have the ability to manage other users or manipulate any of the globally saved dashboards and queries, whereas an admin certainly could. One thing I'll mention is that at this time, there is not multi-tenancy in the respect that one user will see some source data, another user will see other source data. At this time, all users will see all source data, but that is one of the most popular requests we've gotten. That is something that's on the roadmap for future development. So in the future, that kind of multi-tenancy will be in place. But for now, it's mainly for authentication and what kind of access they have to modify things like administrative settings and global resources that people have put in place. And then down at the very bottom is update license. And so if you try out Log Server and it works out to be a great value and it meets your requirements, you can just drop your license key in here and be up and running and fully licensed. So that's a quick walkthrough of the Log Server interface, getting data in, making use of the data, sending alerts, managing the system itself. Before we jump over to questions, I wanted to talk real quick about the licensing side of things and the free trial that we've got set up and some of the support options that are available to you as a pre-sales client. And so Log Server is licensed based on the number of instances in your cluster. And so the important consideration there is that we don't license based on data. And so that really sets us apart from a lot of other leading solutions. Now, from a technical perspective, the more data you're taking in, the more instances you'll likely need. So if you're taking in 20 or 30 gig a day, 1 or 2 instances should work great. But if you need to intake half a terabyte a day, you'll definitely need more instances just to support the intake and the parsing and the databasing of all that data. So you can see we have many options here. You've got the single instance at $19.95 and up to 2 instances for $4,995. And at this point, you'll actually have clustered redundancy. And so you can, if an instance dies, you'll still have all those shards on the other instance, so you can keep working in the meantime. And then 3 and 4 and all the way up to 20 plus. And we do have people with 20 plus instances using Log Server today. So the cool thing about it is that it's very scalable. You can just keep adding additional instances to handle an ever increasing load. And also, like I said, we don't charge based on data. And so there's no magic number where you hit a certain cap and you just no longer have access to your data. It's basically as much as you can intake with the instances you've got is great. Now these prices do also include a 1 year of direct support, email and forum support with a business day response time guarantee, and maintenance, so you've got access to new version upgrades throughout that initial year. We also have the free 60-day trial, so we highly encourage you to do some testing, try it out, make sure it works great for you, set up some common sources and things like that. And so the free 60-day trial is right at nagios.com. Very easy to find. Right on the front page, you'll see Nagios Log Server, and you can go to free download. And there's many different options here. And so you've got the option to use a Hyper-V VM. That's one option. These all run CentOS, or a VMware VM. So those are just ready-made virtual machines. Log Server and all its components and the operating system are all just bundled together on a VM that you can spin up in Hyper-V or VMware and be up and running very quickly. And again, those run CentOS 6.9. You can also do a manual install onto your own RHEL or CentOS Linux system. And so if you'd like to, you could do a manual install under your own bare metal RHEL or CentOS server, 6 or 7 or what is supported, or your own RHEL or CentOS VM if you'd like. I'll also note that during the trial, you can cluster as many instances together as you'd like. So if you want to try a larger cluster, you certainly can, and that can kind of help you gauge performance differences between cluster sizes. So lots of options there, fully functional for 60 days. And then during that trial, there's a lot of support options. So first off, there's the knowledge base, which has hundreds of technical articles, tutorials, documentation links to help you get up and running with their solutions, to help you troubleshoot common problems, to help you carry out advanced tasks. And so for Log Server, there's 73 separate articles here, and that's support.nagios.com/KB. And so we'll open up the Log Server section here, and you've got documentation, installation, troubleshooting guides, so lots of useful options there. And then the support forum is another great resource. So that's support.nagios.com/forum, and we'll jump over there. And so here, you can register a username with the link on the upper right, and then post in general support. And this will get you direct help from the same support techs you'd work with as a licensed client. So you'll see a Nagios Log Server section here, and you can basically get help from the support techs. All the guys in green here, these are, as I said, the same support techs you'd work with as a licensed client, and they're happy to help you out, happy to answer deeper technical questions, help you accomplish specific tasks. So that works out to be a really good resource too. And then, as I said, if you'd like a custom demo, feel free to get a hold of us, and we'll get one together for you. So that's a quick walk through the licensing side of things, the free trial. Let's take a look at questions. I had a couple come in. I do appreciate you guys posting those, and if there's anything else you guys are wondering about, go ahead and put them up. So thanks for this first question. And this is actually one that we see quite a bit. So the question is essentially, how do I figure out how many instances I need? How do I figure out how to architect and license it if we have no idea how much data we're going to intake? And that's a really good question. It's kind of a cart before the horse situation where you need a log solution, but you don't know how much log data you're going to generate, and so it's tough to size it. So my recommendation would be quite simply to, and we'll jump back to Nagios.com again, what I would do is use the free trial to figure this out. And so if you set up an instance or a cluster, get that going, set up feeds from your common sources, and then you can use that data to extrapolate how much log data you're going to be intaking. And I'll actually jump back to the log server interface here, and if we go to index status, right here in the primary size column, so in administration, index status, you'll see how much data you are intaking on a given day. And so once you've collected for a few days, this will give you a good baseline. And ideally, you'd set up a feed from every source you've got, right? Have all your sources send in so you have an exact number. But say you've got 15 each of 10 different types of server, and they all have very common tasks that they're oriented towards. You could set up one of each and then extrapolate out how much data you anticipate. But even an approximation would be useful information, and the best way to do that is just to set up a feed from your sources and start intaking that data. Next question I see, so thanks for that question. Hopefully that was helpful. Appreciate the question. And so this next one, thank you for this one. So this one has to do with basically figuring out how much data a single instance can handle. And that's a moving target too. So just like it is with something like Nagios XI, where there's so many variables in place that impact how much monitoring a single Nagios XI or a single Nagios core server can do, very similar in Log Server. So typically a safe number for a single instance would be about 20 gig of intake a day. Now that could vary wildly depending on a bunch of different factors, such as the strength of the machine, which is kind of an obvious one. Does it have 8 gig of RAM and a single core and slow disks, or does it have 64 gig of RAM and 7 core or 8 cores and SSDs? And so obviously how well provisioned the instances are is going to have an impact. The more instances you have, the more efficient the system is. Things like the type of filters being run. Going back to those Grok filters, if you have really complex data coming in and you're running a very complex filter, that's more resource intensive too. So ultimately there's a lot of factors, but again, a safe number, about 20 gig a day, but it could be higher. You could do 50 or 60 gig a day from a single instance, or 150 gig from a 2 instance. but there's a lot of factors, so it's very difficult to say for sure without some testing. And so that's another huge advantage of that 60-day trial is, again, you can test it out, you can set up intake from your sources and get an exact picture of how it performs within the context of your unique requirements. But from a general hardware perspective, just to kind of add to that, again, RAM is very important with Log Server, up to a max of 64 gig per instance. When it comes to processing power, more cores is better than faster CPUs. So more cores is better than faster CPUs. And then for the drives, obviously fast disks are going to be better. So if you can allocate SSDs, that's going to make a huge difference. There's a ton of I/O with Log Server, and so that could be really helpful as well. So sorry I couldn't give you a specific answer there, but hopefully that was some helpful information to at least get you started. And ultimately, testing is the best way to figure this kind of stuff out for sure. So taking a look, I don't see any other questions, but if there's anything else you guys are wondering about, feel free to email sales@nagios.com. We'd love to hear from you, find out more about your requirements and outline how we might be able to help. Otherwise, thanks again for the questions. Thanks so much for joining me here today. I hope the session was constructive for you, and we'll look forward to hearing from you soon. Have a great rest of the week, everybody.